All right, I guess we already heard Happy Mother's Day. Is this on? Oh, okay. Welcome to FBC this morning. Nice to see your smiley faces. Most of you are smiling, which is amazing. We're continuing in the amazing Gospel of Luke, which should make us all happy. I want to start by simply reading today's short passage from Luke 8. Remember that this immediately follows the words of Jesus, "My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it." So we're going to start by reading it. We'll talk about it, and then we'll talk about how to do it. And so we start with verse 22 of Luke chapter 8. One day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. There was a calm. He said to them, "Where is your faith?" They were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" It's the word of God today, just 5 verses. I read once that this text was used in a Belfast church the week after the sinking of the unsinkable Titanic. It was on its maiden voyage. You know the story of it. Maybe saw the movie. I don't know how accurate that was, but the date of the disaster was 1912. In fact, April 15th. In fact, we Americans commemorate that disaster every year by mailing in our taxes. Belfast was where this massive ship was proudly built, and 16 members of that congregation went down with the ship that they had helped build. It was devastating. Even strong men would meet each other on the streets, grasp hands, shed tears, parting without speaking a word. The next Sunday, April 22nd, the preacher read this small story and told his grieving congregation that only one vessel in all history had been truly unsinkable, that ordinary wooden fishing boat that transported the sleeping Savior. The safest place in the universe on that day was on any boat where Jesus was. Well, Jesus, however, was the only one on that boat that knew that. And the boys in the boat didn't realize it till it was over, and that's what we're going to talk about. I'm tempted to insist that we have this story 3 times in our Bible, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because there's obviously something here that they and we have really got to learn. It's a story of fear and faith. It's a story of weakness and power. It's a story both mundane and miraculous. It's a story with tumult and rebukes. It's a story with a perfect storm and imperfect disciples. It's a story of unnerving storm and unnerving calm. The story is so compact. I mean, just 5 short verses to cover hours of history. Pretty amazing history, with at least 3 dramatic plot twists in it. And so there's a lot packed in there, so there's a lot to unpack today. But this isn't a made-up parable. This really happened. Although it has many metaphorical elements, such as a storm and a sleeping master, and you could go on to the different parts, hardly anyone has ever read this story or preached on it without conceding that it stands as a real-life example for other people facing the storms of life. Storms of all kinds. It was sort of a lived-out parable. It's actually more powerful than a words-only one because it actually did happen. Every character in it got drenched to the skin with real H2O and got scared to the core. Except Jesus got drenched, yes, scared, no. It all happened exactly as we read it, with different eyewitness details in the separate accounts. We'll bring a few of those in as we go, although we're sticking with Luke. I want us to think of this, though, as a story that you really can relate to, as real as, taking the trash barrel out to the street before you go to bed. Stopping on the driveway to check, there's a little wind there. I wonder if their clouds are coming in. Maybe we're going to have a storm. I don't know. Maybe you're wondering how you can be doing something so boring for the 1000th time. But hey, this is life, and you don't need to know or even need to think that anything has to be so special and memorable every time. But if you had been on that boat with the disciples, this was a one-off. It was a little voyage, but you would never forget what happened and the lesson that you were taught on that lake that night, a night that started out almost as unassuming and ordinary as rolling out the trash. That's the whole idea of telling this story over and over. Matthew, Mark, Luke. This wasn't real boring. This was spectacular, real roaring, if you want to put it that way. But it starts out pretty boring, at least for them. They climb into an ordinary boat. The goal here is, at the start of the journey, if we could just read the verse plainly, is simply to get to the other side without any mishaps or loss of life. One day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, let us go across to the other side of the lake. So they set out. There it is. The lake was evidently calm, so Luke leaves us to assume that the same number of guys who boarded the boat would climb out on the other shore. But the boys who got out of the boat were not the same as the ones who got in. They're not the same on the inside. It took a great storm and a great storm master to change them. But of course, here at the beginning, they have no reason to think anything like that's going to happen. Some of the master's men were boat guys, lifetime fishermen. They had weathered many storms together, some of them fishing together, but several were pathetic landlubbers, like probably the tax man, Matthew, I'd guess. And Judas Iscariot, he is from Judea, where lakes are about as common as a ham sandwich in a synagogue. You don't think Judas knew a gunnel from a goonie bird. He was so totally out of his element, you can imagine that it wouldn't take much of a storm to make him lose his lunch. But other disciples weren't known to be fishermen either, but let's guess that maybe half of them were used to boats, and so they would be skilled in sail and rudder and oar. And so their presence would tend to make the nervous guys to just calm down a little, just in case the boat was feeling tippy. I'm just trying to imagine how this story would have played out as some of the guys were counting on some of the other guys to keep them safe and happy. Good luck with that. The last person they would expect to need for boat safety would be the carpenter, builder, in the back, a Nazarene from, Nazareth. No lakes there. Background in stone and mortar. Appears to have no interest in helping with the oars. So here he is after a long day of exhausting work. Jesus mainly teaching. They're all happy enough to give him a break. And that's not a problem because they have what? They've got Peter and the other fish guys grabbing the 4 oars and going for it with their burly hands, showing off for the white-collar guys whose only calluses are from overuse of the office stapler. With 4 oars and then 12 oarsmen, that divides into, 3 equal shifts, and they should be able to make it across that 6 miles or so to the other shore. They won't be needing Jesus, as far as they know. The boat itself was probably very similar to a nearly petrified fishing boat I saw on display on that same shore, that same lake, as well as that reconstruction on the right. The shell that you see on the left had been submerged in the mud of the lake for 2 millennia. It's dated from like 50 BC to 80, 50. Now it's known as the Jesus boat because they imagine this is so similar to what was being used in this very story. It was originally 27 feet long with 4 oars, a mast, and room for 15 or so passengers. Sides of the boat were low, which I suppose was good for fishing, but would make swamping the boat in a storm pretty easy too. Now, I'm not a meteorologist, but I've read up a little on the storms on this lake. And so first, let's talk about the lake. It's a freshwater lake. Freshwater comes from the Jordan River, which flows in and then flows out. It's often called the Sea of Galilee, which is on this map, which is like calling a pup tent a house. It's only 13 miles long and 7 or 8 miles wide, about 1/4 of the size of the lake that I used to live on in Montana as a kid. They never called that a sea. Anyway, the disciples would be heading mostly eastward across the narrow dimension. Could be as long as a 4 to 6 hour trip, maybe a lot less with favorable winds. So let's say roughly 2 hours at the least, and on an ideal day, which, of course, this wasn't. It's helpful to know the latitude of this body of water. It's 32 degrees north, which is like Baton Rouge, Louisiana. and also the altitude as far as sea level goes. The highest lake in the world, I was just interested, what's the lowest, what's the highest? The highest lake in the world is Ojos del Salado. Those that speak Spanish are going to laugh at me when I try to pronounce that, but anyway, it's right on the Chile-Argentine border, so you can see on the steel it says La Frontera, so it's right on the border, and so it's at 21,000 feet high. Think of Mount Rainier at 14,000 plus, and that's way up there. But it's not very big. It would fit easily on our property here, of our church property. And so, sorry, it had little effect on the Earth's weather patterns. Unlike the Sea of Galilee, where it is, the Lake of Galilee, which is 700 feet below sea level. It is the lowest freshwater lake in the world and very warm most of the year. So storms, and I've read in different places, well, storms are so common. They are not. I tried to find what's the latest storm that happened that was a really big storm. There was one in 2021, I think, but I saw videos of one from 1992, I think it was, with 10-foot waves crashing and winds gusting at 90 miles an hour. Certainly harsh enough to recreate what we have in this story. But they don't happen like once every 20 or 30 years. A sudden violent storm could arrive, though, very quickly when a very cool wind sweeps off the eastern hills and then drops suddenly over the warm air that covers the lake. So there's the setting, the boat and the lake and weather forecasts, so you can get a feeling for what that lake is like. The task then was simply to get to the eastern shore. It was totally Jesus' idea. He appears to have an appointment with a demonized man who is running around unclothed, the man who needs Jesus desperately. Come back next week. There will be pigs. But first, a boring voyage. Now, here's the first surprise to break through the mundane. So let's just get into this. Surprise number one. And don't tell me that you kind of figured this might happen. They set out, and as they sailed, he fell asleep. All right, so plot twist, number one. So Jesus is going to get some shut-eye before he, grapples with the devil on the other shore. He falls exhausted on in the back, the stern, on a cushion, Mark tells us, and is fast asleep as the boat is moving smoothly across the calm water as night falls. This is the only time we're ever told that Jesus slept. The only other note being that the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, unlike the foxes and the birds that we're going to learn about in chapter 9. Evidently, Jesus was used to bedding down wherever he could. Now, I don't think he was curled up playing possum just to see what his boys would do. Most scholars assume this was just plain exhaustion, having been mobbed for hours by needy people, and so there he is sleeping, the oars creaking, the sails flapping rhythmically with the easy breeze, and he's sleeping like a rock baby. Now, there's nothing that unusual about an exhausted person falling asleep, until it dawns on you that this is an exhausted creator, a being so powerful he could muzzle a hurricane, but here he is, slumped, drained against the scuttles. And I can't think of any passage in the Bible that more vividly pictures both the deity and the humanity of our Savior. God never slumbers or sleeps, we know from Psalm 121, but here's Jesus fast asleep. God Almighty, the omnipotent God, is never tired, but here's Jesus exhausted. But yet man cannot control the weather. Every storm is commonly rightly called an act of God. That's why we show up at a summer wedding and all of a sudden it's raining and they never planned on that, and they can't go to the local meteorologist and say, could you change the weather for today because we have an important event. But here's Jesus forcing his will on wind and water, and the disciples have no answer for this than to explode with wonder at the end. What sort of man orders the winds and water, and they have to obey him? Now, so we get both natures of Christ, where he is most emphatically both God and man, and if you learn nothing else from this passage, file that away as a very strong thing that we hold on to with all our heart as Christian people. And obviously, the most unusual thing, as you read through it about his sleeping, is not that he fell asleep, but that he stayed asleep. When the soft rocking turned into frantic pitching, and then even worse, where the keel started filling up, and then the boat with cold water to the point where if Jesus is actually lying down on the keel, he would be the first one to drown if he doesn't wake up. And then when terrified and seasoned sailors are screaming bailing instructions to, the CPA guy, bail, Matthew, bail. And then when the wind starts howling like a wolf, claiming fresh territory. At the edge of this chaos is a man sleeping. A man in every sense, a man as men were meant to be, in complete calm in the midst of turmoil. Was this just because he was extraordinarily tired? Or was it because he was extraordinarily trusting? Physical exhaustion or spiritual composure, or both? My question is why Jesus wasn't afraid, which I think is a far bigger question than why the disciples were, which we can all understand because we're pretty sure we would be. The incarnate Jesus was theoretically as vulnerable to drowning as any of his men, just as nails and whips could kill him as easily as the two thieves that hung beside him when he died on the cross. What Jesus shows us is extraordinary faith, which is a major theme of this story. Jesus rests calmly in the loving care of his Father. You may think Jesus, as God, had some kind of inside information and resources that we don't have and that we can't access, and so we can't expect to ride out a storm the way Jesus did, but that's not the way this reads. If we were in a storm like this, we would figure we had good reason to be afraid, but it doesn't appear that when Jesus thought about the disciples that he thought he should wake up and apologize. Like he would say, hey guys, sorry to be asleep when things got so bad. Can't blame you guys for freaking out because this is all above your pay grade. That had to be so hard. You're just human after all. And storms like this will always rob you of your peace. I mean, that's just being human. And that's the way it's always got to be. Who could expect you to stay calm? The answer to his question would be, he would. What he says to calm them is actually a rebuke. Jesus actually knew that if the boat went under, he was certainly able to save himself by walking on water. Plus, he could help the rest of them walk on those tossing waves too. Remember how he helped Peter walk on water in a similar storm while the waves were still pounding. Jesus expects more from them. We'll talk about that more. Well, let's look at the storm. Nothing ordinary about it. It's a windstorm, a fierce gale. It came down on the lake. Came down. That's a very accurate description of how those storms developed. Picture that heavy, cold mountain air being dragged down the cliffs and the ravines by gravity toward the below sea level lake, colliding with that rising warm air from the lake, setting up a whirlwind that churned the water like a monster ninja blender. They were filling with water, it says, as the huge waves were breaking over the boat and were in danger. Matthew called the effect of this like an earthquake, uses the word seismos. The hungry winds tear into the defenseless waters, and if you were in a boat this size of this fishing rig, you're in trouble. Tirades of wind and furious waves can heave enough water in that boat that bailing could never keep up. Nothing they do is helping, and on top of that, it's pitch dark. There's nothing supernatural about this storm, except its timing. I think we should assume Jesus knew the storm was coming, at least for the sake of discussion, we'll grant that, but let's ask a deeper question. Did he actually cause it? Was this like the storm that Yahweh hurled on the Mediterranean Sea when Jonah was trying to flee from Nineveh? He didn't want to go to Nineveh, so he was headed for Tarsus. More than likely, and he was sleeping in the boat too. More than likely, yes. Jesus was part of the whole design of this, considering how rare such storms are, and that just happened to occur on this particular night. But why would Jesus want his guys to head into the jaws of trauma? Just death, but just imagine going through this, a level of danger that makes his men fear for their lives. He's the one that gave the orders to go, for them to sail to the other shore late that night. I mean, they could have waited till the next morning, spent more time teaching, healing, at least resting. He's exhausted. Or Jesus could have prevented the storm before it ever started, instead of scaring his men to death and then stopping it. So what's happening with this? I think you know by now that Jesus is developing these disciples. These are not experiences, these are training lessons, helping them become the kind of men that they would need to be to carry the banner of the gospel and the kingdom into the future once he's gone. He's far more interested in their character than he is in their comfort. G.K. Chesterton said Jesus promised his disciples three things: that they would become completely fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble. And why the trouble? Well, what Jesus knew is something that we all are trying to learn, and probably learning the hard way if we don't learn it from Scripture, something that Malcolm Muggeridge talks about, the power of adversity. He wrote this: supposing, did I forget to put that up there? There we go. Supposing you eliminated suffering, what a dreadful place the world would be. I would almost rather eliminate happiness. The world would be the most ghastly place, because everything that corrects the tendency of this unspeakable little creature, man, to feel overimportant and overpleased with himself would disappear. He's bad enough now, but he would be absolutely intolerable if he never suffered. As an old man looking back on one's life, it's one of the things that strikes you most forcibly, that the only thing that's taught one anything is suffering. Not success, not happiness, not anything like that. Only thing that really teaches one what life's about is suffering, affliction. So here's a huge takeaway from this story. If you're a genuine follower of Jesus, you have to expect suffering. I could take you to so many verses in the Bible about this. Even though that boat couldn't sink, theoretically, this was one of the hardest experiences these men would ever face. Yet what Jesus does for us in the storms provides an amazing doorway to the best of discipleship, becoming like Christ. The disciples, of course, don't have a clue of any of this. And we know that from the next part, the panic. So here we go. I'm caught up now, I think, on the slides. And they went and woke him, saying, Master, Master. The repetition is very intense. You can picture them shaking his shoulder. Master, Master, we are perishing. Now, it helps here to compare the other Gospels, and we really need to here, because Luke by itself could mean something other than a call for help. It could mean that they're announcing the bitter end that they must all face together, time to get right with God. Imagine saying to Jesus, prepare to meet your maker. Well, we find out that's not exactly it. But we go to Matthew and we pick up on, we have another little phrase added, which is obviously intended in Luke as well. Matthew records some sailors saying, anyway, save us, Lord, we are perishing. It's a call for help. It's not clear what they thought Jesus could do about the situation, since this story wasn't in their Bible yet. And judging by their stunned reaction at the end, they didn't know Jesus could shut down the wind. Although if they knew about the sailors in Jonah's story, think about that again, when the prophet Jonah was, remember, sleeping in the storm, and Jonah volunteered to be thrown overboard to save the ship, and then sure enough, everything calmed down. So maybe they thought the prophet Jesus might have a solution like that, maybe throw Judas overboard. Or maybe Peter, whoever had the worst attitude that day. And then, of course, pray for a big fish. But they don't know what he could do, but who else would they talk to? Go to Mark. Mark hands the microphone to a disciple with a rebuke on his lips, maybe the outspoken Peter, who elsewhere is not shy to criticize Jesus. Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing? Now remember, Mark traveled with Peter, and we're told that the book of Mark is a recollection of Peter's travels with Christ. So I think it was Peter. Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? So there's the first of three rebukes in this story. And so what it kind of meant was, teacher, it must not matter that much to you that we live or die, or you wouldn't be in the back sleeping. If you don't help us, we're going to die, but maybe you wouldn't miss us. We call that passive-aggressive way of getting someone to do what you want. Make them feel guilty. Well, how wrong can they be? I mean, that is a rude and faithless question. Well, not completely faithless, because they did. It is addressed to him, and there is a sense that if he wanted to do something, he would do it, but he probably doesn't want to do it. But it's at least a rude take on how he could sleep even through the storm, because he didn't care. Lord, you're asleep while we're rowing for our lives, and you can't wake up and at least grab a bailing bucket. It's also not clear whether they included Jesus in the we are perishing, whether they thought, well, we could drown, but what about Jesus? Did they have any idea there was an appointed hour for him to die, and it was not yet? Well, Jesus wouldn't really announce his death very clearly like that until the next chapter, that it would happen in Jerusalem. So that if they already knew that, they would know, he's not going to die here, we know that. But they didn't know that yet. Or maybe the we meant them, kind of in this way. We are your close associates. And here we are getting the short straw when you have been saving the lives of strangers right and left. And here we who left all to follow you are expected to fend for ourselves without you lifting a finger. Well, let's just put ourselves on the boat. Do you ever doubt God's goodness and concern when it seems like he's silent and sort of asleep at the switch, and then you panic because it seems like time is running out? It could be a health thing, or it could be, some unanswered prayer about anything, and it could well turn out. Well, it could well turn out like Lazarus when he died, because the Lord in that case appeared not to care, but actually deliberately waited too long so that Lazarus would die. Jesus had something bigger in mind than just healing his friend. He was going to raise him from the dead. But we are sort of like Lazarus' sisters, who assume that we know what we need and when only Jesus knows how to build a person and at the same time build a kingdom in a way that brings maximum glory to God. And that's the whole idea. Like Jesus could let all of his guys drown horribly, and then he could have just raised them from the dead, or not. Whatever would bring greatest glory to God. No one should minimize or take casually the dilemma of God allowing suffering, such as the great grief of Lazarus' two sisters. It was not a small thing. Or even the suffering of Jesus, who had told his disciples that he was glad he wasn't there in time to heal Lazarus, but then on the way to the tomb, he wept. Shortest verse in the Bible, he wept. Jesus wept. Also, maybe the most mysterious, considering the fact that he was just about to raise Lazarus with great joy. Were those wasted tears? Were they phony sadness? No. Jesus cares, even weeps. But he's not losing any sleep over our perceived disasters as if they had no purpose or would damage you some way that wasn't the most glorious thing for God and the best thing for you. How many verses would I have to quote to make you realize that you should never think or suggest that some perceived inaction on God's part means that he has lost interest in you? He is, in fact, sleeping like a baby because he has you right where he wants you, where you have the greatest opportunity to learn to trust, not mistrust, where you learn what Mother Teresa famously said: you will never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. And that's what the panicked disciples were down to. All they had left was Jesus. The oars weren't helping. The bailing buckets weren't helping. The seasoned sailors weren't helping. All they had was him. Sometimes God brings us to a point of absolute desperation at the end of ourselves so that we will truly know him. So does he care? It's a big question. But I could ask it like this: did he let you breathe between the hour of your birth until just now? Because if God were not good, you wouldn't have anything at all. He wouldn't have any patience for you. And without that patience, the moment you even thought about sinning, you'd be dead. Or what about G.K. Chesterton? Expressing sincere gratitude, because what did he deserve? Here dies another day, he said, during which I've had eyes, ears, hands, and the great world around me, and with tomorrow begins another. Why am I allowed to? Why am I allowed to? And maybe we should learn to be grateful that if he cares for us at all, it is massively more than we deserve. Rest your soul in that. And then if he wants to, and in his own way, he engineers the calming. And he awoke and rebuked the wind, and here's the second rebuke in this passage, and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. Matthew and Mark say a great calm, translated perfectly calm in the ESV. Now, that's two miracles. because it says he rebuked the wind and the raging waves. So it's one thing to shush the wind, as Jesus said. He had words for this in Mark, hush, be still. But for the boat to float immediately on a sea of glass, that's not a storm that's just run its course, where the disturbed water will always remain agitated for quite some time afterwards. But this immediate calm proves this is a mighty act of God. According to Psalms like Psalm 65:7, who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of the waves, the tumult of the people. Psalm 89:9, you rule the raging sea, when its waves rise, you still them. Or you could read almost all of Psalm 107. Matthew says Jesus stands up in the floundering ship, sort of like getting a good look at a bunch of unruly kids who are playing too rowdy without a chaperone. He says, hey kids, be quiet, stifle yourselves. And then the roughhousing stops immediately, just like it does at your house, without any whining. And why? Because the winds and the waves obey their master who made them. You might ask, why stop the waves if there's nothing to be afraid of? And that would have been a big lesson, maybe a bigger miracle, to still their hearts while the waves are still going. But remember how when Jesus asked Peter to go ahead and come out and walk on the water, he didn't calm the sea before he did that. He showed him how to do that. But that comes later in our gospel story. It's not actually recounted in the Gospel of Luke. But possibly Jesus could have done it that way, but he didn't. I think their hearts are so immature that he's going to have to do the miracle first. And it's that miracle itself that calms their hearts and teaches them and proves to them that he does care, to build their faith and their awe by showing his might. There was a purpose in it all, and it was all about faith. How do we know that? Well, look what Jesus says to them. Now in Matthew, we find out that Jesus started to rebuke them even before the calming. Why are you so afraid, you men of little faith? That's the third rebuke. But when they woke Jesus up, he might have been a grumpy old guy, and just said, let me sleep. Why are you waking me up? What am I supposed to do? But he said to them, where is your faith? Where is your faith? Now, he's actually rebuking them for being so afraid. They had really no excuse for being so terrified. It's a sign that their faith is weak. We know from Paul in Romans 14, whatever is not of faith is sin. Matthew Henry said he does not chide them for disturbing him with their prayers, but for disturbing themselves with their fears. It seems that this whole episode was designed to test their faith, and it's clear that they flunked. It's not that they should have calmly drowned and just let him sleep, but they could have wakened him up with a spirit of faith, which was a calm submission to God's will. Lord, is this the time we're supposed to die? What are we to do? Tell us what to do. Now, it's not wrong to disturb God when stuff is over your head, but you come with a heart of acceptance, submission, humility. Why are you so afraid? Jesus says in Mark. Wasn't their fearful reaction perfectly normal? They could say, well, Lord, we've been going through a big storm, and death by drowning is not our favorite way to die. So, could you do something? And maybe you might think Jesus is a little insensitive to put his men down for being scared. After all, these are just men in process, and they hadn't seen the miracle yet. But look, Jesus had shown them plenty of reasons to trust him without fear. The miraculous catch of fishes was the first miracle that he did in their presence. And then, or even before that, the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And then hundreds of healings and exorcisms and, a leper and a paralyzed man and many others, centurion's servant. And the man raised from the dead, a resurrection. Good grief. The widow's son at Nain. It's as if Jesus is saying, haven't you guys seen enough of my power and experienced enough of my love to know you are perfectly safe with me? Because of my power, I can help you. And because of my compassion, I will help you. Even if you should drown, don't you know that would mean instant heaven? What then do you have to be worried about? And Tim Keller said, all that death can do to a Christian is make their life immediately and infinitely better. Doesn't faith mean that you're confident that what God intends to do will come to pass? And when Jesus said, let's go to the other side, that by itself should have squashed any fears. Watching him sleep peacefully even as the tossing waves are filling the boat, could have given them peace. But they should have had more faith, or Jesus would not rebuke them. They should have had more faith. We're not told whether any of the disciples try to answer Jesus' questioning rebuke, where's your faith? They evidently don't make excuses. What could they say? They've been terrified out of their minds, while the maker of the universe and the God of all storms is a few feet away. They've been caught dead to rights, and so it looks like they're just going to stand around in the sloshing water, and in the boat they had been ready to go under, and suppose they can just start bailing out the water. As they do that, begin to speak to each other, speaking as their adrenaline returns to normal. What they say to each other is another question, their question, which has an unspoken answer as well. And if they get the answer to that right, it will govern the rest of their lives. If so, that voyage was a great success. But if not, it was a waste. So let's talk about the amazement. They were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" It's not that they didn't know God could calm seas, but they watched how Jesus did this without praying to God. He just spoke, and it was done, as if he himself were God. They were afraid, as anyone should be in the presence of a God of such power. They were afraid of the storm, but they were even more scared of the calm. Or better, the one who did the calming, what he must possibly be. Matthew and Mark say that they are now very much afraid. The idea of dying right away was not as scary as to them as the presence of God. Wasn't Jesus trying to solve their fear? No. He was trying to get them afraid of the right thing. He's saying, I'll give you something to tremble over, me. It's like a more terrifying storm, a God on the loose in your boat. And he holds, and this is words from Ken Geyer, he holds the wild mane of nature and reins it in to absolute calm without as much as a whinny. So they stood soaking wet and shivering and terrified, knowing now that the man who slept in the stern was actually in control of the helm, their lives. And at this point, Luke doesn't have to tell us that they made it to the other side. That's assumed, but also turns out that really wasn't the main point. The voyage is a success because men of little faith are men of bigger faith when they're done. They have come to know Jesus as God in the flesh. It says that they marveled. We should wonder if we have forgotten how to be in wonder, that God is in our midst. Some of us have been Christians for many, many decades. We've forgotten that there is a Jesus Christ who speaks and waves stop and wind stops. He can do anything he wants. You need a crash helmet on when you come to church or in your closet with God. You don't know what he's going to do. You know it will be something powerful, but also incredibly loving, and maybe you're not even ready for that. So the untamed God is on the loose among us that should overtake us when we join hearts with these men who went through this with Jesus. That's why we have a story like this. We're to enter into it. It offers us choices. Daniel Taylor talks about stories, and every story is saying, believe me or not, bring me into your life or keep me out. Here's the story. Now you decide what to do with it. So let's talk about that, what we call a walk away. Now the Bible often likens our trials to the figure of storms and waves, such as Isaiah 43:2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. Some of us, of course, in this room are struggling with some level of panic in some storm. Maybe a storm no one knows about that we're in, a storm of confusion or of sorrow, calamity, disease, financial thing, guilt of some kind. You're over your head. And you're wondering, am I safe? Can I experience the peace that passes all understanding? Where is that? Is it possible to have confidence that I'm not going to perish in my storm? Well, where does that hope come from? And this is the key, I think, to all of this passage. Jesus is with us. The book of Matthew ends with this. It was a theme of the heart of Christ. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Before your storm, and during your storm, and after your storm, I'm with you always. Hebrews 13, I will never leave you or forsake you. When you're worried about money stuff, it's the context. Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And in the psalm, you know how to quote that psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It all starts in the third person, but when he gets to this, he switches to the second person because he realized, well, the Lord is with me. Why am I just talking about him? I would just talk to him. You are with me. Or Psalm 91, near the end, when he calls to me, I will answer him. This is God speaking. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, the very present help in trouble, a present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Or read the stories of Joseph. God was with him in his prison cell. Stories of Paul. Paul is in a boat ready to be destroyed, basically, and everyone drowned. And it says the Lord stood with him. The Lord was with him. Now, these guys would never forget what happened that dark night. And it would certainly play through their minds when they were thrown into jails and surrounded by mobs and sometimes left for dead. Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me. They learn it first in the context of this terrifying storm. And the lesson Jesus taught them through it became truly unforgettable and life-changing, to the point where they wanted to put this into the Gospels wherever they could, even though they looked like total failures. But they knew we all needed to see Jesus like they did, because we're all people that are struggling to have real faith, the faith that fights our fears. This hair-raising night of personal fear and failure is when they learn to ask what we all have to. Do I trust him or don't I? Can I trust him? And it's reading this that we learn that. It's not like he just said this in a training lecture one day. He said, well, I'm going to be with you. He said, okay, let's go out and I'll show you how I will be with you. His presence is supposed to calm your fears even before you see him do anything to rescue you. When it seems he's sleeping and not noticing you, what you're going through. But that takes faith. So here's where we are this morning. The faith is fed and grows by reading and truly believing stories like these. Because I go back to where I started. This really happened. This is a real Lord. He is here. He is with you. He said, I will be with you always. He's with you. You walk out of here, I don't care where you go. He is with you. That's not a fairy tale. That's not, kind of sanctimonious talk. That's real. Reading the story is how the great Puritan John Owen became a Christian. Says there's a real Jesus Christ. And we who have a Bible know much more than the disciples did. We know how Jesus died out of extravagant love for us, and who could be more with us at that point than become us as sinner on the cross. So when life is scarier and bigger than you are, which is always the case, because you cannot live even one day without being over your head. To actually live that completely for the glory of God, that is more than you can do. But he is there. And whatever life is scaring you with, it is never bigger than Jesus. You have little faith. And what a thrill to laugh at the power of the storm, because we know the Savior is with us and he's stronger still. Or as the psalmist said in the passage that we started meditating on this morning, mightier than the thunders of many waters, mightier than the waves of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty. Jesus is already on your boat and he's not worried. The lyrics to Be Still My Soul Probably know this song. They were written by Katarina von Schlegel in 1752. She had struggled a lot to understand the death of her husband after a long illness. And she wrote these words as an expression of her fervent trust during this time of deep sorrow and pain. And this is, of course, has comforted countless individuals who are facing their struggles. Be still, my soul. The Lord is on thy side. The comfort of these words is based partly on this very story we are trying to feed on today. And so in verse 2 it says, Be still, my soul. Thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul. The waves and winds still know his voice, who ruled them while he dwelt below. But you must often wait. That's why we need faith. We have to wait, see what he's going to do, if anything. We wait. Spurgeon spoke of this text back in the 1880s, I think. The sermon was that I grabbed this out of. He especially was speaking to those who felt neglected by the Lord. That might be you. He said, My dear brother, do you know that sometimes God works a greater wonder when he sustains his people in trouble than he would if he brought them out of it? For him to let the bush burn on and yet not be consumed is a grander thing than for him to quench the flame and so save the bush. God is being glorified in your troubles. And if you realize this, you will be ready to say, Lord, heap on the loads if it be for your glory. Give me but strength equal to my day. And then pile on the burdens. I shall not be crushed beneath them, but I shall be made to illustrate your power. My weakness shall glorify your might. Well, here in Luke, right before this voyage, Jesus had just said, My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it. So how do we do this after hearing it? So let me give you just 5 quick things. This is going to be very brief. The first one is this. Know that following Christ will not keep you from having difficult times, perhaps many. You know, the trials may be the Lord's doing, not just the rescue. But some people have been told that if you follow Christ, then, you know, your garden will not have weeds and your tomatoes will be big as basketballs and your kids are always going to help out without being asked. Miracles, yeah. No, he says expect troubles. You may not see a miracle. The number 2, confess the Lord is with you, even if it seems he is sleeping or inattentive. He may sleep, but he never oversleeps. Number 3, don't excuse your fears as if they're not all that sinful. We try to pamper ourselves when the sin that we're doing is so common and natural. So rebuke your fears as real sins. There ought to be a stark difference between sailing with Jesus and him not being in the boat. It is all the difference between faith and not faith, or weak faith. Have you never read the story? My question. Have you never read the story? Is it true or isn't it? If it's true, then why are we afraid? And let us rebuke our fears as saying, I have not listened. So if I have heard and not done, what kind of a disciple am I? Everything you need for peace, you already have because you have Jesus. Number 4, anticipate trials as God's best opportunities to grow you into the Christ-like person he redeemed you to be. Don't ask him to cut them off short if there's still work for that trial to do in your life. All that work at the oars and the humiliating temptation to despair only set the stage for their Lord to thrill them with love and glory. And here's number 5. Fill your heart. Fill your weak heart with the true stories. I mean, these biblical stories and the promises of Christ's powerful and loving presence that are all over the Bible. And then you will know what the disciples should have known, that as high as the waves may be and as fierce as the winds and as deep as the water was getting in the boat, there is no safer spot in all the world than in a boat where Jesus is present. So what we hear and know from this miracle, few have known actually, Most people spend their whole lives governed by and driven by, hounded by their fears and insecurities. But we who know Jesus have the sublime and undeserved blessing of governing ours by the presence of Jesus in our unworthy souls. Well, almost all of you know the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," which we're about to sing. Yeah, you know how it starts: when peace like a river attends my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. We sang this song a couple of weeks ago at our hymn night. Not all of you were here, so I'm going to repeat something that Susan used to introduce this song, because you need to know this story before we sing it. Horatio Spafford was a successful lawyer, businessman, and devout Christian who lived in Chicago in the late 19th century. However, his life was marked by tragedy and loss, including the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, which destroyed much of his real estate holdings, and the death of his only son shortly thereafter, a precious 4-year-old. 2 years later, Spafford decided to take his wife and daughters over to Europe, hoping that the change of scenery and the opportunity to meet with fellow Christians would lift their spirits. They were about to leave, but he was detained on an urgent matter in New York, so he sent his wife, Anna, and their 4 daughters on ahead. If you know the story, then it gets very tragic. Tragedy struck once again when the ship carrying his family collided with another ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and sank. Another unsinkable ship going down. It was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It sank, killing 226 passengers, including Spafford's 4 daughters. His wife was one of 47 survivors. When she arrived by rescue in Wales, she cabled her husband, saved alone. Upon receiving the news, Spafford immediately booked passage to join his grieving wife. While on the journey, the captain pulled him aside and said, "I believe we're now passing over the place where the ship went down." Spafford went to his cabin. Couldn't sleep, disturbed in heart. But then he said to himself, "It is well. It is well. The will of God be done." And he later wrote then his famous hymn based on those words. The tune was written by Philip Bliss shortly before he and his wife were killed in a terrible train wreck. I'm just sharing that because I don't want anyone leaving this room today who is thinking that getting Jesus in the boat and all this peace stuff is about trusting the Lord to make everything turn out the way you think you need it to. Because this is all about things turning out the way he wants them to. That's where peace comes from. When sea billows roll, whatever my lot, lot chosen by God, he has taught me to say, "It is well with my soul." Let's pray. Master of the wind and waves, help us to listen to this text with open hearts, because we have all seen plenty of storms, have seen how quickly a peaceful day can become catastrophic. Thinking we were strong, we have discovered ourselves weak. Maybe sudden illness, maybe an unexpected death, financial hardship, marriage rocked by, maybe even by infidelity, good sons and daughters steering onto rocks of shipwreck. This very hour, some of us, perhaps most of us, are being drenched in some storm and need to know with certainty that you care, that you're present, and that we will surely reach the shore of your purpose by your strength, not ours, in the calm of your omnipresent, loving hand. Lord, we believe. Help our unbelief. Calm our anxious fears. I ask this in the name of your peerless Son, Jesus. Amen.